Today we're going to paint this charming winter wonderland. These are the brushes we're going to use. If you don't have these exact brushes, just grab what you have. These are the supplies you're going to need. I will put this list in the notes below. And if you don't have these exact colors, don't worry. I have sketched out here on my paper very lightly the main elements. I'm going to start by putting in the sky with the clouds. And we're just dabbing it in. The clouds are a varied mixture of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and rose madder. Some of the clouds are darker. And one thing to remember when you're doing this is that it's going to dry a lot lighter. So you need to make sure that the clouds are dark enough to start with. Here at the horizon, I'm using a mixture of Prussian blue and ultramarine blue and a lot more water. I want it to be slightly lighter at the horizon. Now I'm going to go back in there and I'm going to darken those clouds up one more time. You just kind of randomly blob them down where you want. Keep them towards the top of the sky though. Okay, now it's time to pick up that angle brush, dip it in your shadow green. These are the background pine trees. It's shadow green, ultramarine blue, and a tad bit of the sap green. But I'm going to stop here for a minute because I want to pick up some of that pigment. Those clouds need some lighter spots, and this is a damp, clean brush. It has no paint on it. Okay, back to the pine trees. Take that angle brush and just put in about 3 trees. Just tap, tap, tap. Don't put it on the white part of the paper. Keep it on the cloud part, on the sky part. Adding some more dark to it. And then we'll tap it out with the angle brush to make it look more natural. I'm being very careful to keep the pine trees off of the white. And that's because this is a hill, and the pine trees are behind this snowy hill, not in front of it, so they can't go in front of it. Okay, right here I am sprinkling some coarse salt on the paper. That sky is still fairly wet. The paper is still got a little bit of glisten to it. It's not super wet, but it is still quite wet. You want to make sure that you don't leave paint puddling up around the edges, because it'll puddle up around the edges of your painting. Okay, we're going to put some snowdrifts in. Notice I've picked up my big brush because I want big, loose snowdrifts. This is a mixture of Prussian blue and ultramarine blue. Maybe just a tad bit of water right there to soften the edges. And we're marking out the road now that goes back into the painting. It's fairly wide at the front. and it goes very narrow towards the back. I put some raw sienna on my brush to represent the mud in the snow. Okay, I'm going to paint the fence in now, and I did not mix up my fence color ahead of time. I probably should have. But you can watch me here trying to get the exact right color. I want the fence to be a soft gray like old wood. So it's mostly a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Has a touch of raw sienna in it also. The sketch that I used for this painting, it didn't have a lot of detail in it, but it definitely did have these fence posts in it, because getting the fence posts correct is key to getting the composition correct here. The fence posts not only get smaller, but they get much closer together as they go back. They also get a little lighter, in value. Everything in the foreground of a painting will have more detail. The colors will be more vivid, and there will just be more detail in everything. So much like those background pine trees have very little detail in them, and the foreground pine trees that we'll put in later will have much more detail in them. The front of the fence will also have more detail in it than the fence going back into the distance. Putting some darker lines under the fence rails, and this creates the illusion of a 3D thing, because there is a shadow underneath of a fence rail because the sunlight hits the top but not the bottom. Don't put all that detail in the very back of the fence though. You notice I kind of stopped doing that about halfway back. Now we're going to put in that kind of gnarly tree. Sort of the same color as the fence, maybe a little darker, or it will become a little darker. And much like the old fence with the sort of crooked posts kind of falling down, we're going to have a kind of imperfect tree too. It's kind of an old gnarly tree. The fence and the tree are both imperfect on purpose. An old fence is more interesting than a new fence. And tree growing in the wild is more interesting than a manicured tree. Trees are a lot of fun. You can kind of just paint the branches how you want and use them as a tool to lead the viewer's eye around the painting. So your tree does not need to look like my tree. You can paint any old tree you want to. Even in the dead of winter, a tree will have a few old leaves clinging to the branches here and there. Picked up some raw sienna, and I'm painting in a little bit of grass and a few more leaves. Raw sienna is just a great color for sort of a dry, dead foliage. Putting it in the fence a little bit too. It's a good idea when you have a color that's playing sort of a minor part in your painting to see if there's a couple of places that you can place it around. So here, the raw sienna is in the mud, it's in the dry grasses, it's a little bit in the fence, and it's a little bit in some of the leaves. It's sort of a, when you do that with color, it's sort of a tool that you use to kind of lead the viewer's eye around the painting, sort of subconsciously. Okay, let your painting dry at this point and brush the salt off. If you use your hands to brush it off, make sure your hands are clean. You don't want to get any body oil on the paper. Okay, we're using Sap Green, and we're just marking in the pine trees. You always want to start with your lighter colors first. So here the Sap Green is the lighter color, and later we're going to add some dark shadow green to it. And you just sort of want to let your brush kind of flutter back and forth in almost like a Z-like pattern across your pine tree. We're going to put some of that shadow green in. It'll sort of blend a little bit with that sap green. We're going to build the tree out a little more. Remember to leave some spaces in your tree where you can kind of see through the tree to the sky behind. Your tree will look more interesting, it'll look more natural. Shadow green, the dark green, when you're putting that in, generally speaking, you want to keep in mind that shadows tend to be underneath of the branches, the bottom. And here we're using a little burnt sienna, and we're putting in the trunk. Not a big stripe going all the way down, sort of a broken line with a few branches just shooting off here and there. So I got my hand in the way there. Sometimes I forget I'm recording. Just a few little branches here and a few little branches there, sticking out of the pine tree. Gives it kind of a natural look. Putting a little more snowdrifts in, little shading. Just a few more details using the side of the brush. A few more grasses. A little bit of shadow under the fence. At this point, you want to let the painting dry completely. We're going to add some snow with gouache, white gouache. It is a water-based paint similar to watercolor, but it's more opaque. You mix it up a little bit thicker than watercolor, sort of the consistency of heavy cream. When you're putting gouache over top of a watercolor painting, a couple of things are important. First is to make sure that your underlying watercolor painting is completely bone dry. The second is to use a light touch with your brush. You don't want to disturb the underlying painting. And you don't want to have too much water mixed in with the gouache. It will activate the underlying painting and it will all kind of mix together. So I'm just using a light touch and I'm just laying down little bits of gouache where I think the snow would naturally lie on the trees. There's a good chance that this white will dry a little darker than I actually want it to. It'll blend a little bit with the colors underneath. And if that happens, what you want to do is let the whole painting dry overnight and then go back the next day with the same white mixture and just put another layer down gently over top of the first layer, and that should brighten things back up again. And I actually did that in this painting to create the final version. Put the snowdrifts on the pine tree at the top of the pine boughs. And try and do it kind of randomly and softly. We are now going to use a splatter method to represent falling snow. What you do is you fill your brush with paint and then you tap it with your index finger. I recommend practicing this on a piece of paper before you splatter it on your actual painting. And here I just wanted to show you guys how you need to take the tape off of the painting so that it doesn't tear the watercolor paper. You hold it kind of close to the surface and you pull it off at an angle. Otherwise it can tear the watercolor paper up. If that starts to happen to you, a good thing to do is to heat the tape up with a blow dryer. Just let it get nice and warm. It'll loosen the glue up and the tape will come right off of there. You could just hit it with a blow dryer for 30 to 60 seconds and it'll come off easier. I didn't do that in this instance. I didn't need to. There you go. There's the finished painting. And I think this would make a really nice piece of winter decor, or maybe you want to put it in a frame and give it to a friend for a Christmas present. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did like it, I hope you'll hit that subscribe button. It would really help me out if you would do that. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for joining me.